Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, we're awake after lunch. I know how that is. I'm not going to lull you to sleep if I can help it. First of all, we decided to try and, we were asked to come up with a title, and so I put down on the paper, American Peril / On the Beach in '94. So I think that's appropriate where we are. We've had a chance to travel across the country at different times in the last year. We've spoken to many patriots. We've been every corner of the country in one way, shape, or form. We've had a chance to experience what the attitude of the people are out there. And from all walks of life, from all age and race groups, makes no difference. As long as rigor mortis hasn't set in, I'll talk to you. And in fact, chances are you eventually have to do that with me. Prop me up here and plug the tape in. I won't stop. Originally, I started out as an intelligence analyst in 96B and as a 97C counterintelligence coordinator with U.S. Army Intelligence through U6. U6 is now one of the more popular three-letter terms that you hear, ATF, FBI, DEA, DOD. As an element of the United States Army Intelligence, U6, United States Army Intelligence Center and Schools, creates most of the human intelligence mechanism that you see for Army components, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps. Most of this training started in the 70s was cross-training, in which one service took care of the maintenance for all services with regard to intelligence indoctrination. To give you an idea of what an intelligence analyst mission should be, and what they sometimes end up doing, the intelligence analyst mission originally is to take in whatever available data there is, attempt to verify that data with the different resources that we have at our disposal, and then, if need be, come up with an overall evaluation, first of all, of the specific picture with regard to an aggressor or an individual's activities, and second, to come up with a counteraction. Some way after predicting or effectively identifying and then predicting the activities to come up with a countermeasure. Now, something has been commented on in the past, I've heard this before over the years, conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory would in fact apply were it not for the fact that this is an ongoing activity. Conspiracy makes you believe that it's down the road a ways. That's not the case. You're dealing with an ongoing projected action against the American people of the United States. How long has it been going? Well, our aggressor is patient. I believe personally that, yes, this is involved with many centuries, not just decades, that the aberration known as the Republic of the United States is something that would, if they had their way, be swept aside, no longer to be seen in the history books even, Orwell's 1984. It is the blessing of the Republic that we have, even in its later state where it's actually being usurped by many other foreign powers, that we're able to do what we're doing tonight, what we're doing right now, what I've seen done for the last 3 or 4 days. It is the capability, the option to be able to explore what you feel are the alternatives that may be necessary for your lifestyle, something that in other societies does not exist. Well, there are people who would like to see that change in this nation dramatically. They've been with us for quite a few years. They've been successful in some ways, unsuccessful in others. And while most assuredly the faces have changed, only the names have been changed to protect the guilty. And this is typically the case. As we've seen in the past also, the aggressor will return time and time again. There's one simple reason for that. When you have something that is good, it is inevitable that evil will make an attempt to take it from you. Inevitable. Not maybe, not kind of, but if you possess something and you are defensive in nature, the aggression will come to your doorstep. Now, aggression comes in many different ways, but eventually will culminate in a physical manifestation of some kind. And in this case, what we are seeing now is, with all of the attempts that have been made to force us or to coerce us into handing over the Republic, which have not been successful so far, it is inevitable that as the mask is peeled away, we are going to see more and more of the true nature of the aggressor. When I say aggressor, I'll use some of the common terms very quickly because I'm not going to spell out 1,500 times while we're speaking who it is. Many different elements. One, you've all heard before probably, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, et al. There's a list of this tall. As I said before, only the names have been changed to protect the guilty. What we have is a situation where a series of individuals have been conspiring and then successfully executing activities to undermine the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And that is the target. Now, one thing, and there was the speaker yesterday did an outstanding job of demonstrating with the flag what we fail to understand, is that even as we have been trying to hold to the Republic, the dictionary is changing that defines what the Republic is. The whole concept of how our government works and what it's supposed to do for us. And first of all, and most important, which was stressed here, and I can't emphasize enough, is the forgetful nature of man in comfort to realize that government and the Constitution, as we know it, is only as good as the people that are willing to back it. If you will not stand for it, it will most assuredly be lost. We are seeing now, even as we speak, that flower taken from our hand, that torch ripped from our grasp. The darkness is coming, and it is a great darkness if they have their way, and they will be used quite often. I will use the word they. Again, emphasis added, multiple threats. In the past, in 1981, if you'd come to me with this, I had some inkling that there was something wrong when I was on active duty, when I was functional as an intelligence analyst. But if your life depended on it to sell me this idea, you probably would have passed away. It's that simple. I came from the inside out as opposed to a ground teaching by having a parent or a relative or a friend come to me and say, have you ever read this? It didn't happen that way. In fact, just the reverse. In intelligence, you start to look at things, especially if you've been trained from the ground up, to look at things in terms of circles. And what I originally looked at, and especially with the perspective that I had, being in a very good position after the Vietnam War, when everybody was going, we were going in, going out, we were coming in, to be able to move into positions that otherwise are not available to young men today even. These windows close and open depending upon the conditions and the times. Well, in our training, when we work with circles, we never put a name on anything. And that's another thing you've been hard-pressed. Contrary to what people have been indoctrinated with regard to how you evaluate a situation, the analyst's mission is to question everything. Even when given information that's somewhat verified, we still have a level of verification. Why? Because the other side has something called counterintelligence. So that even as you're being given information that may be reliable, what degree of reliability is there? So my original contact went back to 1981, and we'd already known that something was wrong coming out of the problems of the Carter administration. Despite the external politics, the internal politics were very dramatic. Internal in that they changed the forms of government. Now, the Carter administration wasn't the only, the Nixon administration part of that, and the Ford administration in between, which everybody seems to forget about, you know, the unelected administration, where we had no elected president and no elected vice president. Remember that? Well, when that took place, we had some major changes in how government functions, who had what authority. And as was discussed yesterday, that authority began to shift more and more to a central power. What's the one thing that I learned, even though, and part of it I had to teach myself, was through reading the Founding Fathers' works, the one thing that our Founding Fathers feared the most was a centralized fist. Always, whenever possible, pry those fingers open. Always. For a central control with all power means one thing and one thing only. First of all, power corrupts. Absolute power absolutely corrupts. Second of all, if there is but one side, there are no deals. How do you negotiate when there is but one power? Ask yourself about the conniving mechanisms, which is what I did about our Founding Fathers. Think about how crafty they were. Knowing that man would be vying for power and possessed avarice and greed as one of his founding traits in many cases, how could he best protect the population not only from other forces but from itself? Checks and balances. We don't want to look at it that way anymore, but that's exactly what it was. And of course we have other terminologies for this that come from different parts of the world, but the counterbalance, the concept of two opposing forces constantly at each other, ensure tranquility. And that's what they were basing it upon here in the United States. By contention, they would create some form of order that could be used. Not the new world order as we perceive it today, in which there will be no negotiation and there's only one side, but many different organizations and many different contentions, and nobody with everything in one hand at one time. Well, in 1981, when I was a lot younger and not quite as well educated, a young lieutenant who was a very good friend of mine I had gone to college with, we were walking through a specific military facility, and we'd inspected this particular site. Afterwards, we're walking down the halls, and he relates to me about these new jobs that are opening up inside the government. And I'm thinking, well, I'm looking for a career. I'm career-minded. I want the 20-out program like everybody else that was just signed into power. And after about 45 minutes of talking about detention camps and talking about new positions as interrogators or as camp detainee officers, etc., I realized there wasn't anything I was putting into this that was pertinent, and he did too. He shut his face, and that's the last time he spoke to me in the last 14 years. Because he realized when he was talking to me that he'd said too much. And his assumption, remember assume, that's a very dangerous word, in assuming what he had done is given me bits and pieces of a very large puzzle. And most of them were a very dark puzzle at that. So I waited, and of course, I sat down with another friend of mine, in fact, a very, very good friend of mine, another person I'd gone to college with, gone to school with, served with. And after 4 hours, and understanding that he knew as much as the other person had, and the reason they assumed that I did know quite a bit is because I had the clearances. Most of you should understand a need to know is pertinent here, because just because you have the clearance doesn't mean you have a need to know. It just means you're qualified if they decide to bring you under their wing and bring you into the fold. Well, after 4 hours of discussing this and understanding that this person knew exactly what I was talking about when I'd heard the rumors of detention camps, when we understood that the positions were available, and that the perceived enemy in this entire action was not a foreign power, was not a foreign military, but were the American people. And that kind of changed my whole direction as to what I was thinking about, where I planned on going. Now today, we see the same situation. All of the different mechanisms that are becoming the police state of America, but not just of the United States, of the United States of America, the globe. This all-encompassing power is only a breath away from reaching out its hand and taking that golden ring and pulling it out of its rack. Even now, we are dealing with a multi-leveled agency, or a series of agencies, that progressively will collapse on one another and become one tier, one all-encompassing national police force. Now let me ask you something about freedom. The Founding Fathers established a national police force right from the beginning. What did they say about that? A standing army is the bane of a free nation. And at that time, standing armies were the mechanism that was used to oppress populations. I will ask again, as I've asked many times, where were they going when they went to Lexington Concord? What were they going to do when they went there? To confiscate arms, powder, shot, and the people. It wasn't the police that were sent, because there was no such thing. The constabulary was made up of people like you. What was talked about here yesterday about the concept of the township and the county are very important, because those were the civil authority that would not cooperate. And so in the end, the central order had to call upon the iron fist. This was true in 1775. It is true in 1994. It shall be true in the year 2000, 2008, whatever. Central authority must have its fist. Well, the Founding Fathers understood this with their checks and balances. There had to be counterbalance constantly. If somebody would pull at one part of the circle, someplace else another piece would be grasped. So nobody would have a full hand in any particular reign. Nobody would have total control. They also understood this, though, and that's why they armed the people of the United States. Unlike any other people on the planet, we have had the capability to use coercive force, not because we desire it as the first choice, but because we understand that the mechanisms and capabilities of all of the elements we're facing have always, in the end, resorted to coercive force. And their first and primary issue is extermination of the threat. Now in nature, and this is very natural because I better remind you, we've got those fangs. We are, and eyes forward, we have that predatory instinct. As has been stated here, the desire is to control it. But on occasion, on both sides, perhaps because of a series of catastrophic events, or perhaps because, again, of planning and conniving on the part of individuals, those traits come to the surface on one side or another and have to be repelled. They must be. And so we've come to that time perhaps again. Now when I say circles, I'll go back to this to explain where we went with this. With circles I had to usually draw a circle, put a big question mark in the middle of it. Here's the problem. Like dealing with planets or dealing with different scientific forces, what you look for are the different elemental components that are drawing energy from or are affecting the main circle. And so when I looked at the government and the way that they were operating, the thing that I had to ask is, what other elements are we dealing with here? Well, as you understand the Founding Fathers, you know there had to be many. But as you look more and more at this system, a greater number of the lesser orbiting planets have been knocked out of alignment. They've been pushed away. And so fewer and fewer influences are available, which means that the dominant circle in the middle is more and more perhaps orbiting around a lesser planet rather than the other way around, which is what the Founding Fathers also expected. If this were to take place, and if all the checks and balances were defeated, the capability to resist with coercive force was put in the hands of the American people for that final check. Now, it does not mean that it would be easy, and it was never meant to be simple, and by no means is it ever guaranteed. Every one of you, at one time or another, will get to choose where you are with your place in history. And that's the problem with most American people, that they don't do. They do not perceive, nor do they understand through their own greed, what their place in history is. Because you all get to choose. And with regard to that, I'll say this. Where one person is at a particular time is ultimately important. The West, and the concept of the West, is that the individual is the important cog to the whole machine. The right knife, the right place, in and out. And that's perhaps a violent way to describe it, but it is necessary at times. Now, the American people certainly are a martial people. And yes, we have had our contentions and we have had our aggressions. But by comparison to most of the rest of the planet, and this cannot be argued despite altering history, the population as a whole has still been the most successful. Ergo, the quote-unquote enlightenment that we see amongst our population and their capability to deduce, their capability to explore, their capability to learn. Did that come from a communist Russia? Did that come from a fascist Germany? Did that come from Benito Mussolini? Did it come from any of the other states? No. And the true diversity and variance that we have is probably best suited in this room right here with the number of people that are sitting in this place right now. That's what the Founding Fathers were talking about, and I love the explanation he gave. You do not govern any farther than you can see. You do not govern beyond your reach, and you have no right to. The only people that are interested in that are people who are based upon greed, terror, avarice, and consuming more than is necessary, for their own good, of course, certainly not yours. So if that's the litmus, and with all these different spheres, what are we looking at today? Well, the way I started into this, and I explained to you a few of the mechanisms that you're going to see, or you've probably seen the last couple of days, if not the last couple of weeks. These are some of the elements that we're dealing with. And I won't get to United Nations yet. MJTF. FINCEN. FinCEN. A new one that you're all going to love and enjoy. The Directorate of Central Law Enforcement. The, of course, National, and I'll abbreviate it, Police Force. And last but not least, UN Combat / International Police. We're only here for your own good. Now first, We'll start from top to bottom here, actually from bottom to top, because it's one of the more despicable elements involved. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's pull that down a little bit. I'm sorry. Can you all see that? Okay. The MJTF police was first formulated back in 1989 as a composite group of many of your law enforcement agencies in one place at one time. Now, as was described yesterday, and it's beautiful to have a good speaker here who's understanding of how our government should work and how the iron fist is trying to work. At the lowest level, your local law enforcement, your constable, your police officers, even your sheriffs, are designed to work for you. That's why you vote for them, remember? By having the authority to draw that person out of a position of power, no consolidated strength can take place effectively or easily. And as we've all reminded everybody time and again, do we rule in this country or do we govern? We govern, don't we? Govern means that you are allowed to be in a position of power for a period of time, and if the people are disgusted with you, they are supposed to get rid of you. See how that works? Well, the MJTF was a way to corrupt the lowest elements of law enforcement by bringing them all under one composite group. The MJTF Police Multi-Jurisdictional Task Force has many different faces. It includes the ATF, FBI, DEA at the higher end to come in and manipulate constables, township police, municipal police, county sheriffs, state police. Now, there's an interesting twist here. State police, for the most part, no matter what state you're in, are commerce police, really. They didn't have anything to do with dealing with law enforcement. Originally, they were dealing with tariffs. In most cases, they pulled you over because you were a trucker, and they were the ones who originally were dealing with tariffs against transportation, weight restrictions, etc. More and more, they accumulated more power, so they became more significant. So the state police originally weren't in the picture. They're just something, again, that was a usurpation of power. Well, once the MJTF was consolidated, its mission was to bring the federal authority down into your home. Most people said, well, I don't care what happens with other people. I got my life. They can go go on down the road all they want. That was in 1989 when they first initiated the activities. Starting out with homes, they went to multiple homes. And from multiple homes, they've gone to blocks. And from blocks, they're now talking about whole cities and whole counties. And in fact, in the most recent announcement made by the Imperium, or the regime, which I like to call it, Lloyd Benson, the Butcher of Waco, Janet Reno, and a variety of other characters stood forward and said they were going to take the house-to-house search and seizure programs that they've been using at the local level and take them to the nation. Now, how many of you would like somebody you don't know going through your home? Please raise your hand. I'll put you on the list. Oh, there's one in the back there. That's good. We got a volunteer. Okay. Remember, beware, sometimes you get what you ask for. If the MJTF has its way, they would. The MJTF police included such activities as no-knock search warrants, house-to-house search and seizure, fax search warrants. Anybody ever think about what a fax search warrant means? It means the evidence doesn't go to a magistrate in which they have to demonstrate that you're guilty of something. Where would that be significant? How many people are here in homeopathic care? What would happen tomorrow if they decided they didn't need to present evidence? For we all know we can interpret the legal person to be, today, to be the illegal person tomorrow. Can I say prohibition? We all know who he is, don't we? Well, in addition to the MJTF police's mechanism or capability to go into your home, they can go into your business and perform a variety of other activities. Originally, I'm going to use the exact wording, there's no confusion here, the original MJTF police guidelines. The MJTF police are the velvet glove on the iron fist. Their words, not ours. Anybody ever get hit with an iron fist? Velvet glove make any difference? Oh, how do you like? I didn't think so either. So that velvet glove illusion, and again, key, watch this hand, watch this hand. Oops, you didn't catch that one, did you? The velvet glove is the illusion of what will actually be total brute force using terror. Now, the MJTF police guidelines state that military, law enforcement and civilian personnel will be used for house-to-house search and seizure. Now, you all understand who the military are, don't you? Any service, whatever green, blue, or tan uniform they're wearing. Police, that's your constable again, all the way up to the National Secret Police Force and the FDA, the FBI, take your pick, the three-letter alphabet soups. Who are the civilians that are going to come into your home? Ah, that's what we said too. Who could this be? Number one, under a series of programs you've probably heard about, street gangs are being incorporated more and more, are being recruited to become an educated mechanism, perhaps to cooperate with civil government. Well, what is civil government? The MJTF police. And in fact, back in 1989 and 1990, the first programs were already implemented. In fact, Chicago, New Jersey, parts of Minneapolis, in St. Paul, Los Angeles, Sacramento, and a variety of other cities under the program 1,000 Points of Light decided to implement a program whereby gangs would be recruited, brought in, given training, and incorporated into law enforcement. This is an old rule of government and force and power. If you cannot harness them and control them, or if you can't, I should say, if you can't eradicate them, what do you do with them? Bring them into the fold. Think about this. Why would the street gangs want to do that? Well, first of all, let's go one step farther back. Why would you allow a street gang situation to flourish? Anybody ever think about that? Because it's the old Hegelian principle of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Create the problem, demonstrate the problem, and come up with a solution you wouldn't have accepted. How do they do that? Well, it's very straightforward. In 1989, a series of laws and rules and guidelines, 7 of them, were taken out of the federal budget to promote an even greater gang effort or street gang situation. Later on, in 1990 through 91, although these guidelines were actually cut before 89, don't just go back to the Bush administration, under these guidelines, they helped to foster a random violence mechanism, street gangs. Now, with street gangs, there's a couple things you get that you need if you're going to incorporate them into a government mechanism. Number one, you get regimentation. You get squads, platoons, and you have all these little groups or cells that are functioning as combat elements. 2, what do you get? You get management, because the strong come to the top. If that isn't true, go visit one. You'll find out very quickly who's in the pecking order, who's in charge, who isn't. 3, all people, no matter who they are looking for some form of justification for their activities and existence. Period. Preferably legal. In other words, sanctioned by some form of government mechanism. Doesn't make any difference what it is, what symbols. In this case, the street gangs will be doing for the federal government or for your MJTF police what they were doing illegally before. Busting into people's homes. And under the booty law, and you're all familiar with the booty law, by the way, some people here are familiar with what's happening. Under the booty law, when they do come into your home, they can take your VCR, they can take your television, they can take whatever, quote unquote, is useful to their activities for their own consumption. In addition, with the booty law, you get a percentage, 25%, 35%, or 50% of whatever is taken from the person, even if they're not convicted. Remember that under the seizure laws, you have 10 days to respond. Has anybody been affected by the seizure laws here? See, so you haven't tasted that little bit of terror yet. But anybody who's into home remedies, anybody who's into homeopathy in any way, shape, or form, knows that there are laws on the books right now that are coming down the pike, that are sliding down the timeline, that are going to directly affect everything that's being done here. Everything. Not any small part. Because the fist cannot bear to have anything outside of its grasp. It is not kindness, it is not eloquence. Like fire, do you remember the saying that was used? Yes, a dangerous tool. Well, because they knew the MJTF police couldn't do everything, though of course they're based upon regional government, which you'll hear more about, FinCEN comes into mind. It always happens at our meetings. FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, is the Big Brother information network right now? Is the Big Brother system in place? If you're not familiar with it, I suggest you look it up. It is available, or information is available through your libraries. You need a good library and not one that's being heavily edited by any of the foreign mechanisms. FinCEN was originally created prior to 1988. It was developed in 1988 and progressively has gotten larger, geometrically doubling or quintupling with every year. At this time, if I were to punch this woman's name into the system, it would tell me exactly who all of her neighbors are, what the names of all of their children are, what the financial records are for every one of the individuals that are dependents and the people who live in the house, what taxes are owed on the house, what weapons are in the house, what money is available to that person, what debts they owe, and virtually anything that is on a computer. The mainframe systems were bought back in 1989 through 1990. There were 13 systems total that were purchased for our 10 regional government mechanisms, 2 primary frames that are doing most of the work, and a third system which is apparently a backup or is designed so that if they load the memories up of the first 2, they can go on to the third system. They can do this within a matter of minutes. This is not a weekly or a daily or a monthly project. This can be done within a matter of minutes through a series of software programs that were stolen out of Chicago and will allow them to wormhole into any other network that exists and draw the information out that they need. One thing that was discussed here is contract, what this whole concept of our new government or this other government is. It's all contracting. You sign a credit card, you signed your soul away. Burn your credit cards. I hate to say it. You have a bank account, you signed your soul away. You sign any component or piece of paper and you have put yourself in a contractual mechanism that interlocks you with the system. Now, can you protect yourself from it forever? No, because FinCEN is designed to continue to expand. If it has its way, it will be illegal for you not to operate without the empire in control. And so we also know of something else we saw here, which was very interesting. We all got a chance to see the Hillary Clinton national death sentence, national ID card. Remember that? He showed it to you all on the Senate floor. Said, this is not it, but that's what he did. He showed it to the American people, and people still do not believe. That card is an extension of an original program that comes out of the same mechanism that created the MJTF police, which demanded a national ID card for firearms owners. But we can't be, in fact, not just regular firearms owners, but firearms violators. But of course, the government twisted this around, and what they said is, well, we can't single out these people, we have to do this to everybody. Well, of course they're going to say that. Which would you rather have, a small pool of data or a big pool of data? So needless to say, 4 programs were developed. State Department was directly involved, Justice Department was directly involved, and it cost $127 million in 1989-1990. The mechanism to create FinCEN and also your national death sentence, national ID card were put into motion. After 3 months of study, in which they already knew the answer before they asked the question, they just spent your cash, it's that simple. The systems were identified to use the card or to use the biochip that everybody's hearing about. It was agreed that the biochip and the debit card were not the first choice because people were not ready to become enslaved that far. So the next step was to try and convince you all that you needed this card. And the healthcare card is designed to be abused. You have already heard in many of the conversations the concept that we have to, before we even have the card, we're going to have card abuse. If we have card abuse, what do you need? More police for the Imperium. And so now we're going to have the healthcare police. Again, I ask you, looking at what I've seen here, I do not believe the healthcare police are going to be enamored to your concepts. You see? They aren't going to have any great love for your idea of what freedom is. In fact, just the reverse. They're going to use Orwell's word speak. Say one thing, do another. See how that works? So, FinCEN's mission is to intertie that new healthcare card. And you're going to hear more and more about FinCEN. You're going to hear it's going to be the next best thing to sliced white bread. Guaranteed. And you're going to hear about it every day. And then you're going to hear about why we need this card so bad to help the children. Every time I hear that we say it, I always start thinking about the Wicked Witch, you know? Yes, poppies and the children. Nice. Sweet. children. Everybody loves kids. You'd hand your soul over for the kids, wouldn't you? Well, right. I love kids, but Mama didn't train no fool. Okay? When the wolf comes to eat, you don't offer him your hand. Okay? So in this case, what happened is the health care card and FinCEN were tied in and bonded together, and are bonded together as long as this thing continues. As was mentioned yesterday, and it was very, very well put, this thing has got a mind of its own now, and even if the Hillary health care plan were dropped tomorrow, it is in motion by some other name. So make no mistake about it, you are coming to a wall if they have their way. Now that doesn't mean it's the only wall, because trust me, Al Gore, or as we call him, Al Gore, you know, Igor, Al Gore, same difference. Al Gore was busy off on his own. Now, have you ever noticed something about people, and I see a lot of live, active eyes here, have you ever looked at the eyes of some of these people? Al Gore is the Darth Vader of this empire. If you don't think so, then you just take the time and watch him. I don't know what it is about him. I don't know who it is that's got him, or how he was indoctrinated, or what it was that was done to him, but he is the Darth Vader of this mechanism. And I'll tell you why. D of CLE, or the DCLE as it could be called, DECLA, whatever term you want to use, is the Directorate of Central Law Enforcement. The reason Al Gore was in the picture but out of the limelight is because he was busy consolidating all of the central federal agencies under one umbrella. Never in the history of the United States, never in the history of any nation, have all of the secret police been brought under one mechanism like this before. Even with the Third Reich, there were subdivisions of backbiting that were taking place, which didn't give everybody total control. And yet with this mechanism, the Directorate of Central Law Enforcement, one mind, one voice, will make all the decisions for the FDA, because they're in uniform. Remember, they have those black SWAT teams. The FBI, you won't be able to tell the difference. And in fact, the letters will disappear. Why? Because they are using terror. With terror, it makes no difference if it's Geheimstaatspolizei, Schutzstapel, Gesetz. At 3 in the morning, the Gestapo, with their little leather coats, nice black ones of course, and their black coal scuttles, and ATF, down, 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 ATF, down, 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 down. 3 o'clock in the afternoon with ski masks. The idea is black. Now, in the 70s, we were taught to shoot things with ski masks, I hate to tell you. Remember them? They used to blow up planes like in Egypt and in the Middle East and shoot people in Europe. We have twisted the people's minds so far that we're now accepting the ski mask as a symbol of our government. Isn't that a slap in the face? That they feel we are all so stupid that we would accept that? That we are so ignorant that we would not pay attention from decade to decade and understand fully the concept of what they are doing? It is not an accident. In fact, they laugh all the way to the bank. Something that was brought up here, another twist to that. The gentleman had a flag here yesterday, which is the flag that should fly over many parts of our government, which isn't really our government, but a regime. How many people remember when they said, burn the flag? It's legal to burn the flag. Why did that court rule that it was legal to burn that flag? It's not their flag is why. It was the American flag of the Constitution, which goes right back to the whole thing about why we are oppressed by the ski masks, why we hate with a passion tyranny, terrorists, or anything of that ilk. The flag of the United States is our symbol. It isn't the government symbol, but the flag that we know, the red, white, and blue one, without the gold fringe, is a representation of your document, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Your document. Not the government's to interpret. The Constitution was a chain upon government to keep it small. What is it today? I think we all know. I'll go right back to discussing control of food, if nothing else. The flag of this Constitution are the Stars and Stripes. The judge laughed all the way to the chamber when he told you they could burn it because they weren't burning his flag. And that's why they let it happen. And that's why I stop people from burning the flag, not because I think the guy's a bonehead. I think he is because he's not educated. But because if he wants to burn a flag, we should all run down the street and buy one of these red and white pieces of trash, or better still, give him a UN flag and let him burn that one. See how long it takes for the police to show up when you do that. For the police won't show up when you burn an American flag now. That should tell you how, again, they've twisted and turned upon its head everything that we represent, everything that our country has represented. The key is this, and it comes right back to why it's in my pocket, and there's several on the table, and Jack McLam brought some, so we should all have one. So you don't have an excuse when somebody asks you, what are your constitutional rights? What's really sickening is I got friends that have gone over to Moscow, and there are taxi cab drivers right now who can quote this verse and word. It's pretty pitiful when the people who possess it and don't understand it can't even probably come up with a preamble, and the people who still aren't under its protection and would cherish it and would fight for it and would be more than happy just to have a portion of it can repeat it and memorize it and think of it every day and every night. That's a pretty desperate situation for the country. But that's where this all goes full circle and where everything has been turned on its head. And intentionally so, with no accident. Well, the Directorate of Central Law Enforcement, you know, Darth Vader's crew, would have a variety of authorities that they didn't have before to interfere with the MJTF police. That's why the MJTF police won't last very long. The MJTF police will eventually be absorbed into the DCLE and the National Police Force. National Police Force. Isn't it amazing how they can say that on a daily basis in the news and not one of you jumped out of your chair and beat them with a stick? How many people here probably said it, and I'll bet you in the last 20 years, well, I'll never see that in my lifetime. You are seeing it on the front page of every newspaper in your lifetime. Not only is it in your lifetime, but it looks like for most of you, if not all of you, it's in your prime one way or another. There's not a person here with gray hair, I don't see them going to be here 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now. So you are going to be directly affected by it. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I just wish I were dead and gone away. That's a terrible, terrible curse to put upon your brothers and sisters and upon your children. Amen. That is a terrible curse. To wish upon children who are not as well prepared as you have been to resist this tyranny, who are skilled, adept, capable, articulate, and already free, though with some limitations, and can stand on your own 2 feet. There's a lot of people who can't right now for lack of knowledge. Garbage in, garbage out. So beyond the DCLE and the Imperium and the National Police Force comes the next step. For as each one of these is absorbed, kind of like water when it's released from a dam, the first dam, of course, is much smaller. As it collapses, it takes in more water from other reservoirs and tumbles relentlessly downstream, downhill with gravity. The MJTF, the Directorate of Central Law Enforcement, and the National Police will eventually be absorbed by the United Nations police units. But the bottom line is this: they are combat units. Their mission is oppression, for there will be only one side and there can be no conflict. Either the empire completely envelops us, or we defeat them. We have come to that point in history in the United States where, as Jefferson and many of the others said, you will have a republic if you choose to keep it. And you shall be slaves otherwise if you're stupid enough to let it go. So we are at that crossroads now. What can they do with the National Police Force? Well, I'll bet you the black uniform is going to become very popular very quickly. How many people here have been in Russia, by the way? Anybody? Thank you. What is the national uniform of the KGB? Did you see it while you were there? Black. Yes, they've always worn it. Before Hitler ever came to power, before the SS were ever a twinkle in anybody's eyes, in 1919, first with the NSKVD, etc., the uniform was chosen to be black. Why? Power and a terror color. That uniform has not changed to date. Germany was ground into submission. We ate their lunch, we walked into their closets, and we pulled out all the skeletons. And yet nobody will talk about, and you don't see it in the movies, and you don't see it in television, describing the true face and nature of the Russian secret police. Solzhenitsyn said it best when he said, "Oh, how we burned in the gulags, realizing that if we had but met them on the sidewalks and one at a time or two at a time destroyed them, the enemy would have run out of secret police and operatives long before we ran out of people." But what happened in Russia, and what was planned for Germany, and what was planned for all these other nations that we discussed? Why did they use the pogroms, the purges that they did? To identify and destroy that threat which would resist. And they worked at it for decades. Anybody who's Ukrainian here recognizes the term harvest of sorrows. The planned extermination of Ukraine, a cost of 14.5 million people, not by the bullet, but because people sat on their dead butts and starved in their own villages also. Not just because they were put at barrel point or at bayonet point, but out of their own fear and terror in action. Sung says this, if you'll recall, inaction is action. It allows the enemy to move about you, envelop you, and eat you. Now, if at the same time you are first appearing to take an action and you return and move in some way to counter that, that's something totally different. Or allow the enemy to perceive an action while in fact you are in motion, that's different. But in reality, not a few million, but the best way I describe it to think about when you discuss what we're discussing here, and this is not fiction, this is all in black and white, this is in government paperwork. And has been in black and white since before 1988, some of it going back, for instance, FEMA going back to the last decade and the decade before, hidden so well that only now we're finding out this much about what they were actually up to. And as I've always said, we're always 10 years behind the times. If an enemy is willing to show you, or if an aggressor is showing you this much, and that's what a lot of these writings are about too, aren't they? If they're showing you this much, in reality, you're missing this much. You see? And so that's where we are with this. If the United Nations combat forces get their way, the national police force is in place, the Director of Central Law Enforcement does its job, we will not move, you will not breathe, you will not eat, you probably won't be allowed to live if they have their way. There's talk of course, a great pogrom here. I've heard 100 different descriptions or a dozen different ways with different groups. We need to reduce the population by 30% immediately. That's the Hillary health care plan right away. I see a lot of gray-haired people here. There is a death warrant on you if they win. Period. And they will not let homeopathic care take place because we've talked about it right here on this podium, that if they have their way, anybody trying to treat you or help you for whatever problem you have will be committing a crime. The freedom that you possess right now includes your health care and your choice to do it or not to do it. You see? And that's all part of law enforcement. Another thing they won't lie about is this. You know what? Every one of these groups is in favor of crime control. Did you know that? And they're only after criminals. We all ought to vote that in. You're not against criminals, are you? I mean, you're not against going after criminals. You better use their dictionary when you start that, though. You better find their dictionary. Black's Law was up here. You better start using their words. Understand, they will twist the rules to their needs and turn everything upon its ear if need be to get you into the system so that they can eat you in the process. So of course they're all interested in criminals. Well, where can they go with this? Well, the next step is to understand how this would be governed. What would they use with this? Enter two different mechanisms. Number one, and I think this is very important to understand, do all of you know that your Constitution is but this far away from being lost right now? Thank you. At least a few of you know. Do you know that there are con votes taking place in 6 more states? There are 6 total. I'll list them. Maine, Ohio, Michigan, Alabama, Louisiana, and Washington State. Now, For most of you who don't understand what a con is, we're not talking constitutional amendment. We are talking a constitutional convention to deride, to take and abrogate this document in some way. There is a document in the wings called the New States of America Constitution, initiated in 1976. Its original program, I'll read the preamble for it. The 50 states of the United States are abolished. The 10 regional governments of the new states of America are established. With this sweep of a pen, this is gone. As soon as 2 more states are able to finish the vote, the Constitution is neutralized. Now, granted, we all understand that these are not just inalienable right here, these are unalienable. Granted by God, they are given to the American people and are written in stone and cannot be taken away, which is what people aren't being taught now. Being granted by God through a higher authority, it is not granted by a monarch, a king, a pharaoh, a queen. Not even the president has the authority to in any way, shape, or form attempt it. They will try. 1775 they did. These knees bend for no one, no man here on this planet, nor will they. We are all independent sovereigns with regard to that. Remember the old term? You all forgot it because it's been dragged out of you. A man's home is his castle. Why did they use that term? It meant that whatever you wish to practice inside the borders of your sovereign estate was your business. That's the concept of freedom in this nation, and why it is it's important to destroy those boundaries, to crush and knock down that wall. And as he said, put a piece of paper between you and the earth. Get you up off it. Sovereigns, being free, have the capability also to defend themselves and need not have a professional military or professional law enforcement to do it, provided they have the responsibility and understand the obligation to do so. But as is typically the case in the past and will always be, man is significantly lazy with regard to this and will surrender or allow his rights to be abrogated. And so will lose progressively those rights, and this is what prevails. This is no different from man any other time where he's had government involved. Well, the regional government, okay, when Darth shows up, we'll have some very interesting concepts. First of all, there is the overseer, which is listed throughout the entire document. The overseer decides all of your rights. And I will tell you who the overseer is. It starts with UN. UN. In other words, you have a right until they say you don't have a right, and then you don't have it. Congratulations, it's gone. Now that's very important because, as I said before, this charter, this document here, states otherwise. Now, I'll ask you before I go any farther, an important thing with this new States of America Constitution, with the Constitution possibly falling so quickly, what is there in the UN Charter that is granted to you that isn't here already? Nothing. And in fact, from this document, about 40 to 50% of it must be taken away. Example, Article 8. Trial by jury shall be decided by a judge, not by the plaintiff, the defendant. Think about that. Do you honestly think you'll ever get a jury trial under those conditions? It's not efficient to have a jury trial. The judge takes so much less time. Hang him. See? What about your practice of religion? The practice of religion shall be a privilege, not a right, granted by the overseer. You better start looking at some of these documents because they're already written and they already are laid down, and they're just sitting there waiting. Our enemy is also patient, which is why my policy is with everybody that I talk to is we must have the patience of a snail. If this fight takes 10 years, it will take 10 years. If this fight takes 2 decades, it will take 2 decades. If I have to pass the flag of the Union on to the next generation, then I will. I will have the patience of a snail, but I know that in the end we shall remain free and we shall maintain our sovereignty, which is unlike any other on the planet, period. For as long as we do work with structures And as long as we work with glass and steel and plastic and lights and are allowed to have conferences like this, and as long as we're able to speak and talk together, it's going to be required that we have this kind of protection. More so than anything else. And the times are getting dark. I'll shift over here. I'll warn you in advance. Okay. Now the time that's involved here, some people would say, is it close? And I would say, when they ask this, yes, it is very close. That, the MJTF police, FinCEN, the New World Order, whatever you want to call it, is in high gear. But there's a reason for that. I'm not the only one talking about this. And there are a lot of other good patriots and young men and women and old men and women and black men and women and white men and women and any kind of men and women you can think of who understand the threat to our freedom. And the MJTF police has already been seen across the country in many different ways in house-to-house search and seizure. In Amite, A-M-I-T-E, Louisiana, approximately a month ago, 15 city blocks were squared off. These elements were brought in from outside the area. They cordoned off the 15-block area and went house to house in search and seizure, confiscating arms and supposedly looking for narcotics. They confiscated 130 arms. They confiscated 5 little rocks, crack vials, tiny ones of crack, and 35 bags of marijuana that were cut loose leaf, looked like little bags of oregano. 15 city blocks. Who heard it in the national news? There we go. Few people did. And why? Did you hear it on radio? That's why, because you didn't hear it in the national regular broadcasting. ABC, NBC, or CBS didn't pick it up. Yeah, that's why. You heard it in the independents. Yeah. Now what happened is, they know for a fact that the American people will not digest this all at once, but this is all gradualism. You didn't hear anything about it because you weren't supposed to hear anything about it. It was a test of the mechanism. In Baltimore, Maryland, not far from here, 6 city blocks were cordoned off on the waterfront. Unlike what happened in Amite, where when they went to the MJTF police, the National Guard was there, the Army Reserve participated in Baltimore. Does anybody understand the significance of that little twist of the knife? The Army Reserve is always federal, isn't it? Whereas the National Guard is controlled by the state. We have a guideline known as Posse Comitatus, and many people might be familiar with it, which ensures that military forces are not used inside the United States as law enforcement, because the Founding Fathers had such a hatred for military forces being used against the people, remember Lexington and Concord, that they did not want to see it happen again. Now, there would still be a need, perhaps, and that's why Posse Comitatus dictates that in order for those forces to be used, the president must put his signature on the line and demonstrate that he is behind the actions to take place. If he does that and signs it, what happens? He's responsible, and if he is in violation of the Constitution, then who is responsible? The man who signs the papers, and that's why the man who's in charge, and this happened before, does not have the guts to do it, because we know it's illegal, we know it's against the Constitution. But they're trying to demonstrate that they can do it without the paper. Oh, that's not important. Well, I'll tell you what, anybody ever dealt with the court systems will find out how important that is when the time comes. And again, all I need to do is look to the left of those tables. We'll find out how important it is. Some of your brothers and sisters, your fellow brothers and sisters of the Republic, have already faced this head-on in many different ways. And so they are the ones who are taking the brunt, square between the eyes right now. Some have died. I know many of you people are very peaceful people here. You have no interest in warfare. You have no interest in raising arms. But let me ask you this. Where were you, brothers and sisters, when Waco was under siege? If you were nonviolent, then stand between the weapons. I ask this not only of you, but many others, for the ministers, and myself I failed too. For if you really believe, if you have faith in what you are talking about, then as the old saying goes, put your money where your mouth is. First rule is this. I did enough research on the situation to know one thing and one thing for sure. The Patriots made a mistake. The enemy could have been destroyed. The defenders made a mistake in that they had properly defended themselves in an unconstitutional venture with an aggression by a foreign power, and they effectively repelled it and then failed to follow through. All the evidence is there to indicate that. Let me give you the best example, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but let me point this out. The government possessed all the videotape from Waco. All of it. Every foot, every inch. It was confiscated by them. If the people in that church and home had been doing what was said, and if they had acted in the way that they claim, when the disclaimer came about full circle, you'll notice that they never showed a single videotape to explain what the government did, because they could not find any tape that was redeeming of the actions committed. You saw a video of talking heads on television, not a video showing the evidence on videotape of the evil actions of those evil, quote-unquote, Branch Davidians. You didn't see it at all because it didn't exist. And all of you who would not give any credibility to the government in most cases, many people sat there and munched popcorn while they watched 90 people die. And put it on videotape and replayed it and watched it again because it was really exciting. And then went to the office and yapped all about how they deserved what they got. Well, put yourself into that home. If you truly understand the concept of this document, you'll understand why they stood, why they had to stand, and why, in fact, that's our Lexington. I hate to tell you. Be prepared. For there's another thing that will be guaranteed, and this audience is like any other, I'll treat you all the same. There will be no more Wacos. It is that simple. If only a handful of us are there to show up, at least I have the intestinal fortitude to stand for my convictions and understand that you don't let that happen here. I don't go along with everything that the government's done in the past. Why should I allow them to do it here in the first place? If you can't clean up your own porch, if you can't deal with the problems here, you have no business telling anybody else what to do anywhere else. Or even for this regime to do what they're doing overseas, if you will not stop them here. So you all have a moral obligation and responsibility, and it's time for you to seek out that truth, grab hold of it, and point yourself in the right direction. I can't emphasize enough something that seems to be lost on the American people in recent times, which we were not lost in the past, is our place in understanding our position in history, our timeline. Either we like to live in the past, or we want to live in the future, but we don't want to explain or understand the present. You are a part of a timeline, not a box traveling through some separate space. You're all part of history. You're all so vitally important to the pulse of the nation, all of you, that I can't see not emphasizing that we follow some of the credos that my units follow, the people that I trained. We have a couple of rules that are very basic. Rule number one, you're only as fast as your slowest man. That's a reflection of how I believe government and how our people should live. Two, we don't leave anybody behind. What that means is, like this gentleman right here who is up in years is a person that I don't plan on euthanizing. Just as I would not destroy the very young, I would not destroy the very old. Any of you, and most of you here are educated, probably had some anthropology, didn't you? What's the basic rule about anthropology you learned? First thing they taught is the three basic rules to decide how civilized a group of people are is how you treat your very young, how you treat your very old, and how you deal with your sick and your dying and dead. Well, with that litmus right now, let me ask you something. How would you judge this nation by civility right now? Yes. And that's from your own teachings, which, in fact, I deal at a college, by the way. I work at a college. And what's fascinating to me is I hear students, well, that's a very rudimentary idea there. Yes, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. The basic truths are taught to you first, aren't they? And then you're allowed to expound upon them depending upon your interest and your teachings and your need. That's why we got what we have here, where everybody branched out the way they did. But the basic truths do not change. Fact, not fiction. And so we do not, I think, in God's eye or in our litmus of, shall we say, education, stand or sit very well in that chart right now. And unfortunately, I would say we're doing one of these numbers. Can we win? Can we change it? Absolutely. You're the best and the brightest hope for the nation, this generation and the generation right now, some of them gray-haired. When I say generation, I mean this group of people that are alive today. I asked you earlier, do you think that the next generation is as well prepared or as well versed in understanding, as well versed as you are? So then who stands for the Republic? We must. That's a hard challenge too, because there's a lot of people here, my parents included, who would like to retire. We were discussing this sitting at lunch. You know, it's up to the next generation. That's true, but it's up to this generation to hold the beacon, to hang on to our liberty teeth. This is one, and our firearms are the other. This first, by the way. Notice I grabbed this first. Because without this, I have no right to the other. I have no reason, I have no excuse to use the other. But until I understand this and know that it is in danger, and once I do and know that I have to protect it, I have every right and I have an obligation to use the other when need be.
Name it for the tape.
I'm sorry.
Name it for the tape.
I'm sorry.
What is it?
Yes, the Constitution, thank you. Choice to use my first liberty teeth, the Constitution, or if need be, coercive force as in arms to protect my rights. And that is necessary and will be necessary. A bunch of peasant people, and that's the term they use, and I wouldn't use it, but in Mexico right now, a war's been waging for 2 months. Why? It's not been heard on the lips of the media. Finally got a little blurb in Time this week. We just saw it in Newsweek. NAFTA. The New World Order has a Third Reich odor. In NAFTA, the Mexicans who were making 57 cents an hour are now making 27 cents an hour. Their standard of living is dropping progressively. When I read the papers that are where I am, people talk about socialists and communists are behind it down there. The socialists and communists here are complaining and lamenting because the people down there that are rising up are the laborers, not affiliated with anybody. They're interested in simply being free and eating. And so what's happened is they've gotten to that point that you will eventually see in this nation where you get to choose between passing away, going down in the ditch without a question, or standing with your liberty teeth and fighting. They've decided that they must and that they have no choice but to resist now. And that's what they're doing. And that's why you're not hearing anything about it. You know what tells me they're successful? Because there is not a single word said in the media. Now, if a bunch of backwoods boys with what started out to be muzzle loaders, old lever actions, and pump shotguns can deal with this threat, trust me, the American people with better gray matter than most between their ears, ingenuity, and what we do have in the way of resources can deal with the New World Order ourselves. Most of the New World Order action is illusion, making you believe it is useless to resist, you shall be absorbed. Remember the Borg? Okay? It is futile to resist, you shall be absorbed. Hockey pucky. They've said that to every American generation. Now, another thing I'm going to remind you of real quick, because we don't have a whole lot of time, but let me point this out. Every generation's made this choice. When you're done and we win, don't think that you're going to protect the next generation from having to make the same choice you did. Freedom or slavery is chosen by every generation since this nation has been created and into the future for as long as she lasts. I'll say 3 things before I go, because I always close this way. God bless the Republic. Death to the New World Order. We shall prevail.